It is another beautiful sunny day on April 17th, 2009. And this dog and pony show with Calvin Castine and Gordy Little headed for Saranac Lake. And we love it here. And we're at 89 Church Street with Mary Hotelling. And Mary, you are the historian for the town of Harrietstown.
Correct.
And
the executive director of Historic Saranac Lake. We're a not-for-profit historic preservation organization, and we're housed in the former Saranac Laboratory that was built originally for Dr. Trudeau, E.L. Trudeau, in 1894.
There is so much history in this town.
Oh, it's a wonderful place to do history because it's so, it was not static at all. It was constantly changing. Wonderful people came to this community and passed through and left, and some stayed. And so it's, you know, there's a constant flow of new interesting stories and people.
You know, who would ever guess that there would be a town nestled in the Adirondacks that would be famous for tuberculosis?
Yeah, who would guess that?
But who would guess? I mean, this area was settled long before Mr. Trudeau got here with people who were interested in logging and other ventures.
Sure, 50 or 60 years earlier it was settled, but he came because of the hunting, actually. He had come to Paul Smith's hotel. He had been there before for hunting, and when he got sick, he wanted to come back. And it turned out that it was good for his health. And so every time he went back to New York, he got sick again, and so he came,
Isn't that
he stayed.
amazing?
He brought his family and stayed, yeah.
When he first came here, you know, in what was it, in the 1870s, 1876 or so, or even before that at Paul Smith's,
Correct.
He didn't think he had very long to live.
Not at all, not at all. He had expected it to kill him very shortly, as it had killed his brother, whom he had taken care of when he was dying.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
We've always liked the air up here in Saranac Lake. We still call it that healthy mountain air,
Yeah.
don't we?
Absolutely.
Even today.
Well, it was healthy then, particularly in contrast to the air in the cities, which was so polluted. I remember even in like the 60s when city air was really polluted and dirty, and you went out into the city air, you come back with greasy hair, and you wash your windowsills and they were greasy, and you couldn't get the black gunk off of them, and so and no wonder people's lungs must have been lined with that. Wow. And it sure made it hard for them for their own immune system to take care of.
Even the Hudson River and the East River,
Sure.
when I lived there in the many years ago, were pretty filthy. The Hudson looks a little better now.
Yeah.
So we got his picture on a stamp.
We had his picture on a stamp.
From a couple of years ago.
Distinguished American Series. I think it was 2008, actually, last year. And he was very, I guess it was instituted by the American Thoracic Society, actually asked for the stamp. And we were just very pleased to find it happening. It's a lovely image of him, and it brought national attention to Saranac Lake and to Dr. Trudeau.
You know, of all the years I've lived around here, I have never been inside this building at 89 Church Street.
Well, it's a great building. It's built into three parts, actually. We're in the 1928 edition called the John Black Memorial Room.
There he is.
And there's John Black, a portrait of him. He was a patient. He was a student of Princeton University in 1917 when he was a senior, and they graduated the class a couple months early so they could go to the war, to the Great War, World War I. At that time, the U.S. wasn't in the war yet. He was a volunteer. He went with, I think, 75 boys from Princeton and 50 from Harvard who went as volunteer ambulance drivers. And when they got there were more drivers than ambulances, so he ended up driving a truck, driving supplies around for the French right behind the lines. And he was there for about a year. He was signed up when the U.S. got into the war in October. He signed up for the artillery, U.S. artillery. We didn't have an artillery. We didn't have any trainers over there. So the American boys were learning artillery from the French artillerymen, and who had a little different slant on it than the Americans would have had they been teaching it. But he was going to come home and teach artillery to fellows over here who were going to go over. But when he got home, they found that he was terribly sick with TB. His parents were industrialists from Mansfield, Ohio, the Ohio Brass Company. And so they had the means to bring him up and set him up as a private patient in a rented house. His mother came and kept house for him, and so he had, pretty much a home-like atmosphere for the years he was curing, about 5 years, and was getting better, and then had to have a surgery and got infected and died.
Oh,
just
my.
when he was going home, and it was just a terribly heartbreaking situation to everybody in all his family and friends. He had become really a part of the community here. A lot of patients did that. They participated as they could socially. As soon as they could go out and have exercise, because walking was exercise, and it was actually prescribed in certain amounts. You could go walk out for 5 minutes and walk back for 5 minutes, and so forth, and build up your strength. So people participated in the community, and he did that. So this is a wonderful gift of his family in memory of John, and it was added to we'll go upstairs and see the original laboratory.
Of course we will.
1894.
We wouldn't miss it for anything, but you mentioned a lot of things that we want to touch on, because even though most of our viewers, wherever they might be, are vaguely familiar with outlines of the history of this community and why it was so popular as a curing place.
Yeah.
They're not familiar with a lot of the details, and what they don't realize is that this was kind of a trauma for some of these sufferers when they first came here. They didn't know what to expect. Most of them were pretty rich people, especially in the beginning, who could afford it, and they didn't know they didn't know where the bears hung out at night.
Well, we still have visitors
We
who
still
worry
have
about
some of
that.
those. But it's true, and after a while, the worst thing some of them had to worry about was boredom, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, if they were lucky. If they
Yeah.
were lucky, that's all they had to worry about. But Dr. Trudeau actually founded his sanatorium, which was first called the Adirondack Cottage Sanitorium. He founded that because he had been treating patients who were relatively wealthy, who could afford to come up as if they were on vacation, like John Black could do, and provide for themselves. But afterward, he wanted to extend that benefit to people who couldn't afford that, and so he founded his sanatorium as a semi-charitable institution. So everybody who went there could pay something, but they were partially subsidized, and he raised the money from wealthy friends to keep it going.
Isn't it amazing
Yeah.
what happened? And a guy who thought he only had a few months to live actually made it till 1915.
Yeah. He lived about 40 more years after he was diagnosed, and actually he worked hard. He was a great administrator, and he created several big institutions when you get right down to it. The sanatorium, first of all, for patient care, and he was the doctor for a while for them. He was also founded as soon as he founded the sanatorium, which was actually founded on, climatic principles, where people would come and travel for their health, and just go to another climate and see if it worked. He started to apply science to it because he had he'd first built his first building, and we'll go see it, Little Red, in 1884. And but just about the same time, he got a handwritten copy and translation of the paper that Dr. Koch in Germany had written about the tuberculosis, where he actually discovered that there was a reason under the microscope. You could actually see a physical reason why people were sick. And after that, he tested everyone's sputum, and he he went to New York, learned how to use a microscope, because he had not learned that in medical school. They didn't have a lab then. So this is right on the tipping point.
Incredible.
It's right on the tipping point, yeah. And of the dawn of medical science, in a sense. So he learned how to use a microscope, and he replicated all of Dr. Koch's experiments here in Saranac Lake, which is just remarkable to me.
Oh, yes,
that,
me too.
That it wasn't in a big city. It wasn't with the help of faculty or money from anybody else. He had a small private income, and he was a subsistence hunter. And so between those things, he could afford to learn all he could about his own disease. And, of course, there had to have been an element of self-interest there, where he was trying to help himself as well, which he obviously did. He eventually did die of TB, but he created so much in the course of the time that he was alive and active.
So much ground to cover today.
Yeah.
And I think we should mention at the outset that, although we thought, and many people still think, that tuberculosis has been eradicated, it's going around in a circle, and now we have these terrible drug-resistant strains of tuberculosis now in 2009. Imagine that.
Well, nearly 2 million people a year die of TB in the world. It's certainly well controlled in the United States, but it's not well controlled in other parts of the world, especially with people who have impaired immune systems for various reasons. If they have HIV or if they have, for instance, you're taking chemo for cancer or something like that, if your immune system is not up to par, many people who have those conditions die of TB, actually. So it's still not solved by a long shot. But Trudeau Institute is actually still working on it.
Oh, isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
That came about later. He would be thrilled to see what kind of research is going on.
Oh,
today.
he would be thrilled.
He might be looking down on us. Who knows?
Well, I'd like to think so. I ask him for help all the time.
Don't we all? Now, in this building, we're going to see a laboratory.
Yes, we'll go up and see his original 1894 laboratory.
And what other things might we see today in this program?
Well, we will go to see, we could walk around the neighborhood a little and see his neighborhood, largely his buildings that he had some association with. We can go up to Trudeau Institute, where they're still doing research today, where they have taken a couple of monuments from the old sanatorium property. We won't go to the sanatorium today, but the Little Red Cottage, the first of the patient cottages, is at Trudeau Institute, and also a Guts and Borglum statue of Dr. E.L. Trudeau. I always like to go there and introduce people to him that way.
Isn't that great?
Yeah. And then we'll go also to our, what we call a Cure Cottage Museum, which is really just a room, a bedroom and a porch, as a patient would have.
That's what they were, bedrooms and porches.
Yeah.
Special cure chairs.
That's right. So we can go see those things today.
That's wonderful. What a thrill this is, Mary, to meet you finally and to take this tour.
Well, thank you so much.
We hope you can share in our excitement. Stay with us. We're going to have a great day. Magically, we're outside and across the road, Mary, taking a look at this magnificent building.
Yes, the right-hand side is Dr. Trudeau's original laboratory. And you can see there's some work going on the front stairs have needing repaired. We're getting some help with that from the New York State Council on the Arts, they've been a great help in the whole project.
Oh, yeah.
And the left-hand side, the lower left-hand side, is the John Black room. We were just inside. And upstairs is the second floor of the John Black room. These rooms were added first in 1928 and then upstairs in 1935. And those were extra lab and office spaces. After Dr. Trudeau died, this building was used as the headquarters of the Trudeau School of Tuberculosis, which was a school for doctors. So they would come for a few weeks, I think 6-week terms, and learn about TB particularly. And of course, research continued.
Well, this building looks solid enough to last for a very long time.
It is.
A little upgrading, and the stairs. Weather paid its toll, didn't it? On those stairs in the front.
They did. Yes, water got to them after a while. But, over 100 years they lasted.
But this is an historic community, certainly not the oldest in the Adirondack region, but rich in history since it wasn't incorporated for quite a few years, was it? And he was the first president?
He was the first president. You've done your homework. It was incorporated in 1890. The village was incorporated in 1892. It's which is actually, I think, the same year as the Forest Preserve.
Yes.
And so civilization has been here right along, parallel with the development of the Forest Preserve. This was a very progressive community. It had water systems and electric lights. When this was built in 1894, they were anticipating electricity. It hadn't quite gotten here yet. So when we get upstairs, you'll see that the electricity was on the surface of the walls. It was not inside the walls.
Isn't it amazing how that worked?
You can just see, how things happen. So,
but he was a tremendously respected person in the community.
Oh, very much so, very much so. And that's really why I think the community allowed all these patients to come in. Some other place might have thought of that as a threat, to their own health.
Yeah, that's something we talked about off camera, and you can understand why.
Sure, of course. But the thing was, they didn't know it was contagious when he first came. And then he was very encouraged, it was very important to him to make sure that public health measures were taken and that all things were followed, so that there was not a higher rate of TB in this community than there was anyplace else among the native people who, people didn't catch it here very much at all. People came here with it, and so there was a high incidence, but not a high incidence of contracting the disease.
Well, we thought we'd take a little walk just to show our viewers what this community was like for him, and perhaps we can make believe we're walking these streets way back in the 1880s, all right?
Well, we could.
Just walk and talk and tell us what we're going to see.
There were photographs of this street in that time period. To the right is the home of Dr. Edward Baldwin. Dr. Baldwin came, I think it was again in 1892, and knocked on Dr. Trudeau's door and said he wanted to get into the sanatorium. He had tuberculosis, and Trudeau said, well, how do you know? And he said, I used my microscope and know I have it. And and Trudeau immediately realized that he had found a soulmate, someone who believed what he believed. So Dr. Baldwin lived here a long time, practiced here, and became Dr. Trudeau's primary lieutenant in the laboratory and ran the laboratory for him for many years.
And now it's connected with St. Luke's.
It's now connected with St. Luke's. It's the budget box for them.
Uh-huh.
And St. Luke's, of course, was Dr. Trudeau's church as well.
Uh-huh.
And he was the superintendent of construction when this building was built. This is the first church in town. It was undoubtedly why this is called Church Street. And
it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, and it was built in 1859. I'm sorry, 1879. What about it?
It's
59 was Paul Smith's hotel.
Oh yes,
yeah.
And that's where Trudeau came first, right?
So this is along with many other things in Saranac Lake. This is got a thematically related name, St. Luke, the beloved physician.
Of course.
And in fact, after Dr. Trudeau died, he was called the beloved physician sometimes, and I think that was a indirect way of saying this man was a saint.
That's a tribute, isn't it? That's
it really
a tremendous tribute. And this is a very distinctive building. Anybody who's ever traversed Church Street in Saranac Lake has looked over there and saying, what a quaint building that is.
Well, it was designed actually by R.M. Upjohn, who was an important architect, and who gave the plans for Dr. Trudeau. He was very good at getting people to give him things, and among them architects who, so this was one of the first. He was also built 3 churches. This is the first of them, I believe, but he also, maybe not. He built one out at Paul Smith's called Church of St. John's in the Wilderness.
Oh yes,
Which,
Yes.
That one it burned down at one time. It was a log church, and it's been replaced with a beautiful stone church. Many years ago now. So we've come to a little corner where there are some cure cottages here, the Worley cottages, and of course they're all over town cottages, but we'll go across.
People, for some people watching our program, Mary, the word cottage might be almost a misnomer. Because some of these cottages are like Adirondack cabins, which turn out to be giant great camps.
Yeah.
So some of these cottages were beautiful, big, multi-story residences with large porches, some of them enclosed in glass.
Definitely so, but and that was an evolution, actually. Well, I want to point out 2 things here. Here's Dr. Trudeau's own house. This is and here's a wonderful plaque to the doctors Trudeau, the 3 of them who practiced in this house. This is the EO we're talking about. This is his son Francis who practiced here, and this is his son Frank who also practiced here. And the last of the family, who's last of the doctors in
And then we
Saranac
have
Lake.
Gary.
And we have Gary, and we have Michelle, his sister, who
yes.
who broadcasts on public radio,
Yeah.
and has won awards for her work as well. So she's doing it in a more educational way rather than hands-on medical. But so this was Dr. Trudeau's second house on the site, because he went back to New York and he learned how to use a microscope, and he came back and was living in a house on this site that he had built, and he had a little office on the side, and he started doing all the research, replicating all of Dr. Koch's experiments in his attached laboratory. When he was away at some point, and Dr. Baldwin across the street was watching the house, well, it caught fire. Some gadget that he was using to keep his experiments warm caught the house on fire, and it burned down. And so this is a replacement house. And you see, every other house in town has big front porches, but this one does not. And I think the reason why is that Dr. Trudeau could not sit out on a porch. He would have been besieged. He would have been bothered so much.
I can understand that, sure.
So this is a colonial revival house that was designed for him by his cousin J. Lawrence Aspinwall, who was an architect in New York City, worked for a very important firm, James Renwick's firm in New York, and this was who also designed the laboratory for him, Aspinwall, and a lot of other things as well. And then I'll just point out one more thing, and that's across the street, the Red House. And that's the home, it was the home of Dr. Lorison Brown. And Lorison Brown was the other important lieutenant of Dr. Trudeau's, the other important helper, who was at one point the resident physician and ran the sanatorium for him. And because he came along a little bit later, after the turn of the century, he was particularly interested in the comfort of patients, and he wrote a little book called Rules for Recovery from Tuberculosis.
Oh, yes.
That was handed probably to every patient that ever came to town, and it told you everything in detail about how your cure should go, including how you should fold your blankets when you're going to sit out in the cold.
Isn't it? Everything was
maximally
so
warm.
Carefully prescribed, wasn't it?
It was.
Including every minute of every day.
That's
I
right.
was reading the menus of some of the breakfasts that these people had, and I said to Calvin on the way up here, mutton for breakfast and for lunch, eggs, not too bad. They always had to start with a glass of milk, I read.
Well, that caused a lot of dairies to be built in the vicinity. Yeah. Well, tuberculosis, which was called consumption in the early days.
Consumptives were the sufferers.
It was a wasting disease. You lost weight, and so that was in the early days. That was one of the ways that they measured your health. If you weren't spitting up blood, they were checking to see how your weight was going, and so you'd be weighed every week, keep track. Sure. And I think patients actually kept track a lot of their own statistics in terms of weight and also fever. And so if they were not having a fever and their weight was stable or going up, then they got more privileges. They could go out and walk more. But consumptives lost weight. It was a wasting disease. It caused your body to get thinner, use up its resources faster, and so feeding the patients was sort of a mechanical way of trying to improve their health.
Absolutely true. You are shining a whole new spotlight on this part of the community in Saranac Lake, and I hope our viewers who are from Saranac Lake who didn't know this story, or those who are on the outside looking in, will take a little weekend trip up here to see what we're talking about. It's nice to know what was in this building and that building and that building. While we're standing here, it dawns on me, Mary, that we can mention to people that everybody who came here for the cure wasn't cured.
That's correct. And many people weren't. Yeah.
A stark statement I read were the pine boxes at the railroad stations.
Yes.
At some point in time. So some people just didn't make it.
Many people didn't make it, particularly if they came later, because at the beginning, Dr. Trudeau couldn't offer much in the way of treatment except rest and fresh air, and sort of graduated activities, as we've talked about. So a lot of people did die, and particularly if they came after their TB was well advanced.
Well, that's why he encouraged, for a long time, the youngest, healthiest of the consumptives.
That's right, because he couldn't possibly begin to handle the number of people that would come if he were a hostel for the dying So he really had to. He was trying to affect people's lives where it could be positively affected, where it could make an improvement that would really work. And so it involved actually moderation in your lifestyle in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, but isn't it nice that many of these buildings have remained here?
Oh yeah, and that's sort of what we have that shows what the place was like. It's the artifacts that are left are the buildings for the most part.
I have to picture the streets as being very different than they are now.
Well, one of the things that was very different, our neighborhoods are full of porches. You don't see them here so much, but first and second floor, sometimes third floor porches, where patients sat out all day or slept out at night. And
as I said, many were glassed in.
Yeah, because they started out open and then they realized that the wind made it too cold, and that was probably something Dr. Lorison Brown was working on, making it more comfortable for patients to do what was good for their health. So I think the streets were, when patients were exercising, some other patients were still sitting on their porches. So there was a lot of sort of social life on the street with people, seeing the same face every day and waving, and pretty soon getting to talk. And some couples met that way who were married, and it was, it was a very different world.
Well, I'm doubly pleased that these buildings survived, because this community, like so many communities, suffered from a lot of fires at one point or another in their history, and that in many cases almost the whole downtown was burned down.
Well, that has not particularly been the problem here. I mean, there were a couple of fires downtown.
There were some pretty big fires here through the years. In Plattsburgh, of course, in the 1880s, just about everything was destroyed, and they, in those days you didn't have great firefighting techniques, and many buildings were wood construction.
Oh, sure, yeah. And this town was one of the few, I think, in the Adirondacks that redeveloped its downtown, and not only because of fire, but because there were houses down there originally, and there was so much business that they tore down houses to build business buildings.
I want people to know, and I mentioned this to Calvin as I was reading the notes on the way up here, this is a tremendous little community in many ways, and has been recognized as such nationally. And isn't it nice when those accolades come down the pipe?
Oh, it certainly is. Whenever we see an opportunity, we apply for them. Yeah. So it's been an all-America city, and it's one of the dozen distinctive destinations of the National Trust for Historic Preservation a couple of years ago. And a number of magazines have said it was a great place to be, one of their top 10 or whatever.
Well, and we also, since our viewers have seen our taping of the Winter Carnival every year for many years in the beautiful Ice Palace, and this time with the pirate ship and so on, to know that that's been a part of this community for all those years. While Dr. Trudeau was here in the 1980s, this great annual event began, and look what it's 1880s, not 1980s, and look what it's turned out to be.
So. Well, yes, and it began, actually, it was founded by an outfit called the Pontiac Club on Pontiac Bay in Lake Flower, and Dr. Trudeau was the first man to sign the book, first member of the Pontiac Club. I think that it was a way to entertain patients, because the winters here are very long, and after Christmas it gets to, you think, oh my, how many months is it going to be before we can go outside, before we see the sun, before there's any activity, and so having a winter carnival at end of January, beginning of February really breaks up the winter and makes for a very fun time.
And the patients were encouraged to mix in with the community, and to, especially during Winter Carnival. So it played a vital role in the whole process. People coming downtown, checking things out.
Oh, definitely. When patients did, they patronized all the local stores and restaurants and movies and all sorts as soon as they were able to go out. So it was a place where patients felt comfortable, where they were not shunned, because so many other people were in the same boat. It wasn't a situation. We had, in the late 80s and early 90s, we had several what we called TB reunions, our organization sponsored, and we invited people to come back. So there were patients and doctors and nurses and people that came back to Saranac Lake, and a few saw people that they knew from before, which was very nice. Like a high school reunion, but for many years later, many years later. And they had I forget where I was going with that. They had a great time.
Well, the reunion brought
Yeah.
all those people back, and I'm reminded that Calvin's mother was treated here in Raybrook,
That's right,
1940 to 42. You said
No,
40.
49 to...
Oh, 49. Oh, okay, 49 to 50. So treatment was still
Yeah.
ongoing in this area right up into
Oh.
the 1950s.
Well, Trudeau Sanatorium closed in 1954, and that was because of the drug treatments were developed
Exactly.
and then became available to civilian population after the war, and after they figured out what it took. It took 2 to 3 different kinds of drugs because the TB bacillus becomes rapidly drug resistant, and that's the new problem.
Oh, yes, the newest of all, yes.
multiply MDR TB or XDR TB, which are multiple drug resistant or extremely drug resistant TB, is a real problem in the world now because there's some bugs that the drugs just can't touch anymore. Yeah, and actually, after a little while, we'll go into the Adirondack room of the Saranac Lake Free Library and look at some photograph albums of Brook as well. A beautiful,
Isn't it
beautiful
great? And I
sanatorium, yeah.
also want to mention as we head back, are we heading back now?
Yeah.
I want to mention as we head back something that impressed me tremendously because I try to be an eternal optimist. I try to believe that everything will turn out okay. And guess what? That was one of the primary credos of the Trudeau treatments up here. You had to feel like you were going to feel better. You were led to believe that you were going to feel better, and you had to maintain a positive attitude. Calvin's coming, I know he is, right?
Very much so. Dr. Trudeau was famously an optimist, and I think that really set a tone for this whole community that was rather different from some of the other TB resorts in the country. There are some other books written where they're talking about patients as incarcerated and so forth.
Yeah.
I don't
Good
think
point.
I don't think people felt like that here. I think they felt as part of the whole community. People in the sanatorium. There were other sands in the area as well, and all these private cottages, small commercial sanatoria that are maybe 1 to 8 patients in a house essentially. And everybody felt like they were part of the same community and were curing together in a way.
Yeah. Chances are that anybody who's a descendant of somebody who was born here and lived here for generations have a direct contact
Oh, definitely.
with this whole subject of today.
Well, it was the major business of the community. It was a major industry.
All right, let's go inside and we'll talk upstairs.
Great.
What you see on the screen is the original plaque for this building,
Correct.
which you saved and brought inside.
Well, yeah. Well, it disappeared for a while, and
it did?
and it came back. Yeah, this building in the interim after Trudeau Sanatorium closed in 1954. They sold that property in 57. They continued to do research here until 1964. And by that time, they had Frank Trudeau, the youngest of the Trudeau doctors that you saw on the plaque. He had founded Trudeau Institute for continuing the research. And so they moved over there, and they gave this building. They took the research that was going on here, moved it to the Institute, and gave this building to Paul Smith's college to use as a dormitory and a classroom building. So then they stripped all the TB materials from here. So the room you saw downstairs, the John Black room, was used as a classroom. And this room this level of the building was divided up into dormitory rooms, and they're all...
No kidding.
No kidding, yeah.
Look at these lovely walls. Isn't it great?
They were covered up, and so the windows were reduced in size. These are replicas.
Oh, they
of the
are.
original,
So
yeah.
everything, isn't it nice to be able to get all that stuff off the wall and let people
Yeah.
know what it really looked like in here?
Well, this is a wonderful building. It was designed by Lawrence Aspinwall, as I said, Dr. Trudeau's cousin. He worked for James Renwick in New York City, and they were engineers as well as architects. And so this is a building that's engineered like the New York City subways, actually. You can see the shallow brick arches and steel beams in the ceiling.
You love it, and
Yeah.
the electric lines that go along outside the
The
walls.
electricity was on the surface. And the walls are actually made out of glazed brick. They're not tile. That's what the building is made of, this stuff. So it's not, it's very sound, it's very solid.
That's why it's substantial,
Yeah.
isn't it?
That's why it survived, yeah.
What things can we look at in here? I mean, I saw a wheelchair.
We have a wheelchair that was a patient artifact. This is it was an EKG machine. It came from the Trudeau Sanitorium.
Wow,
It's a
look at
plaque on it.
this.
Yeah.
Isn't that great?
We have some other plaques in here. This is all to be changed.
Oh, yes. A work in progress, right?
July. Yes, absolutely. But you can see in memory of Ralph Robbins, that was a plaque from one of the cottages up at the sanatorium. There are 4 of those that came in at the same time as the other plaque. We were told that this sofa came from the sanatorium. That's why it's here. It needs to be restored.
It certainly looks ancient, doesn't it? I
Yeah.
love it.
And we have some, in the case over here, we have some more research-related materials.
Okay.
Microscope and the scale. The scale was from here. This is a picture of Dr. Koch in Germany, and we have.
Oh, yes, we mentioned his name
Yes, and
and his work.
And there's a museum to him in Berlin. A friend of ours.
Oh,
went
there is. No
Yeah.
kidding.
Yeah. So we have some artifacts here, but all this is to be reorganized shortly. So another time you'll have to come back and film it when it's finished.
Well, everything is part of the historical record.
So largely, the upper part is research materials, and these are patient care items down below. So you see, the big funny light bulb is really from an X-ray machine,
Oh,
because
my goodness.
because this was an evolving health resort. So every time something new came along, they tried it, they made use of it, they experimented to see if it worked, and if it worked, they used it. So X-ray was a big step forward.
Oh, I bet you it
And
was.
then the glass bottle there on the wood frame, that's a pneumothorax apparatus, and that was for injecting air in one side to collapse the lung, to
Absolutely.
rest the lung. There's the TB Society, the framed certificate there, is an inspection certificate for a cottage, because every time a patient moved from a room, they disinfected the rooms. This was a big issue to keep other people safe. So there was disinfection records. They disinfected railroad cars when patients traveled in them, because there were people who were coming to their camps, say on St. Regis, and saying, wait a minute, I don't want my family in the same car patients were in. So there was a disinfection going on right and left, and this is a certificate that's a very rare item, and it's the only one I've ever seen.
No kidding,
Yeah.
that certificate. You know, you mentioned the railroad, and the railroad to Saranac Lake was kind of a latecomer, you know?
Well, it got the first.
Came to Long Lake first, and then finally here, but not-
This is a different one. The first train here came in 1887, December of 87, and the railroads were trying to come into the Adirondacks from several different directions, and this one came in. This was the Delaware and Hudson, or the Chateauguay, which became the Delaware and Hudson. It came in from Plattsburgh direction. And that was the first one here. And actually, it was extremely important to the development of the health resort and of the general resort, as well, because it made it so much easier for people to get here. It was really tough and expensive to get here before you could buy a railroad ticket. So what happened was that the train passenger service arrived the same winter that Robert Louis Stevenson was here. So when he first came part way by buggy. And he went on as far as he could on the train, and then he went on the buggy. And by the time he left, that was in October of 87, by the time he left in April of 88, he could leave from Saranac Lake, right from the station, yeah. And the coincidence, because he had become famous in the interim.
So famous.
When he was here, he had just come from Scotland. He had been across the ocean on a liner, and while he was crossing the ocean, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde hit, and it became famous. So
like a ton of bricks,
Yeah.
and still does.
And he wasn't a well man particularly, and he was in New York and being besieged by the press, and so he decided to come here instead of going west where he had planned to go, because it would be less of a trip for him, I guess. And his family came up, his wife came up and found a house to rent, and then he came up, and Dr. Trudeau was his doctor, because he was really the only doctor here at the time. And he they became friends, and Stevenson wrote a letter of recommendation to the New York newspapers about the Dr. Trudeau's sanatorium. So it was this combination of ability to get here and the fame of Stevenson that really caused a boom in Dr. Trudeau's sanatorium.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
And he was only one of many very famous people, including presidents and authors, you know, Mark Twain and
That's right.
And some people who weren't so famous but more infamous spent time here in the Adirondack region. So
Lakes, Diamond,
it's a who's who, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's pretty amazing. That's part of that wonderful inflow of characters that make it such a great place to be a historian.
It's just absolutely great. Now, what do we have over behind us here?
Well, we have cure chairs.
Yes,
There must have been thousands of these.
as there were, of course.
Porches all over. These were for ambulatory patients. These would have been something that was used by people who could get up and walk around and would sit on the porches in the daytime. If they were really sick, they were in bed on a second floor porch. And actually I first got into this because I lived in a house when we moved here in 1977 that had great wide doors. They were 36 inches
Well, there you
wide
go.
from bedroom to porch. And you
Sure.
thought, why? And then you see that there are scratches on the door frame. That's from pushing the beds in and out.
In
That's
and
from
out.
patients who were too sick to get out of bed themselves, and so they moved the bed and all. So there were those patients who were sick in bed, and then there were patients who were doing other kinds of activities in the daytime, and so they slept out at night. Maybe they had to work, maybe they just couldn't afford to cure otherwise, but they could sleep out at night, and that was considered a good compromise. And then others who sat out were ambulatory, take their walks and then come back and have their rest hour. 2 to 4 was rest hour in Saranac Lake.
You've got to tell me if this is true. I read this to Calvin. From 2 to 4 in the afternoon, the whole community was quiet. The dogs didn't bark and the children didn't cry. One author wrote that.
Well, I wasn't here at the time, I can't attest to that.
But it
yeah.
was like siesta time from 2 to 4 in the afternoon.
Definitely, yes.
I love that phrase.
Well, they apparently
The dogs didn't bark.
Yeah. They apparently didn't make deliveries during those hours, and they even turned the radio station off, went off the air. WNBZ was an
WNBZ, we mentioned
radio.
Jim Rogers,
Yeah.
James J. Rogers III.
Yeah.
But WNBZ was the way people had of staying in contact with the
Yeah.
outside world.
So it was a great thing if you were stuck in bed all the time. I remember I was sick in bed when I was a little kid with rheumatic fever, and I clung to a radio at that time. I
No
listened.
kidding.
Yeah, because I don't even know if we had a TV, but if we did, it was downstairs, and I
We'll
was
say you didn't have a TV.
I was upstairs, and so that's what was my entertainment. So I'm sure that was, it's an easy bedside way to be connected with the world.
Well, poignant example. Albert Einstein was in this area when they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and heard it on the radio.
He did.
Yes.
I didn't know that story. Yeah, but what I did hear was that he was staying I think at Knollwood, and
Yes, that's exactly
yeah.
where he was at this time.
And he wouldn't give any interviews except to a little girl who lived at Knollwood, who was one of the family members, and she interviewed him for her school paper, and then
Yes.
everybody
Everybody descended on it just as CNN would do today.
and they had to give credit to her school newspaper for
Isn't
the.
that great?
I think it's great.
That was the first interview after the bomb was
Yeah.
dropped on Hiroshima.
Yeah.
Just part of the great lore, isn't it?
Oh, it
really?
is. It is. It's amazing.
So what can we expect to see here in 5 years?
Oh, we're
Or sooner.
We're sooner, hopefully. This is going to be a center. It is already a center, but hopefully it will be a better developed center for interpretation of the whole community as a TB resort, essentially. And but we're going to have exhibits installed here. So this will be better organized. There will be downstairs, actually, on Memorial Day weekend, Saturday, we're opening an exhibit called The Great War. It'll be not an enormous exhibit, but new, wonderful artifacts loaned by local families, and the connection of TB and World War I.
Of course, the Great War.
Yeah.
It's essential, as I think you're proving with every time you open your mouth, to preserve this history of this area. History of every area, but this area, it's so powerful.
Well, and it touches so many lives all across the country. It isn't like it's just a very local history. It's very much integrated into the 19th and early 20th century in American history. So we'll have an exhibit up here celebrating the 125th anniversary of Dr. Trudeau's founding of the Sanitorium, and so and his institutions, which include the Sanatorium, this laboratory, and Trudeau Institute, which is its successor.
We're going to continue our program with Mary Hotelling in just a moment.
Yeah.
Well, we said we'd follow you anywhere, Mary, and we have to the end of Helen Street.
Correct. We came up over Helen Hill, which is known to patients as Hemorrhage Hill.
Hemorrhage Hill for sure.
And saw many sleep porches on cottages as we came. And this is what we call the Cure Cottage Museum. This is a private home that has a room and a porch that was used by patients, and now it's just set aside as a little museum of a patient.
You told me a moment ago that perhaps relatives of our beloved late, past historian Addie Shields operated this cottage.
That's correct.
She will be so delighted to see this on television. No kidding.
Well, she was intending to come over and see it, and as I don't know that she ever made the trip, but I think that this will be an opportunity for her to see at least this one room.
Delicious.
I think it was called the Dagno Cottage, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Addie. And it was this was, I believe, an annex to another cottage that was up the hill. But I think it was perhaps an aunt and uncle of hers who ran this cottage.
There's another wonderful French name that has been changed so many times since France, and there's so many names, including Dagno, that come from that name.
Oh. I didn't realize that.
Oh, yes. Everything's connected, Mary. You know that. So what's inside here?
Well, it's a room and a porch. There are, I think, 4 bedrooms in this house, and the typical setup in a private commercial sanatorium for private patients was a bedroom and a porch that was theirs to cure on. And so that's what we have to see inside, a room and a porch that are set up with artifacts from that time period.
And there were literally dozens and dozens of such residences and cure cottages.
If not hundreds.
Yeah,
there are
hundreds.
many. Yeah.
So let's go inside. All right. Well, we climbed the stairs with no obvious ill effects, and we're in this beautiful place. And Karen, what's Karen's last name?
Karen Lewis.
And she wouldn't come upstairs, so she'll forever be known as the Chicken Lady, because this is her home.
And and she has set aside a room. Her home is a cure cottage. It was used as a cure cottage. In fact, when I moved to Saranac Lake, there was still a man who had been a patient, who was living here in this house, and still sleeping on his porch, even though
that amazing?
Even though the rest of the house was rented to students, he was still here because there were patients who did that. I think it was almost a lucky charm at that point.
Oh, really?
It had worked for them.
That was in the 70s.
It had worked for them, and so they wanted to continue it just in case.
But fortunately, Mary also loves the history. Karen,
Yeah.
and Mary too. But Karen loves the history and has amassed quite a collection. And I have to tell our viewers, when we walked in, I heard a Benny Goodman song, and she had a crank-up Victrola and a collection of old 78s. And so she melted my heart the moment I walked in the door.
You might hear it in the background.
Oh, I do, and I love it. I love it. It fits perfectly. So this is one of the rooms.
Yes, and now this room would have been for an ambulatory patient, because you can see that the door is narrow to the porch, and it isn't all scratched up, and it has a step, it has a little bump here.
All right.
So you wouldn't have been able to push a bed very easily.
We'll be careful.
Yeah, but this is the kind of porch that a patient would sit out on.
Oh, I love it.
And it has windows all the way around. So you can imagine what it would be like to sit on this porch and see people walking in the street. They're quite close. And you could wave to them, people that you saw every day on their exercise. So Karen has a cure chair here, and this is a kind of table that goes with over a bed.
Boy, these are getting rare. One of my sons just found one in a barn, and one of my sons who lives in Saranac Lake and said, "Should I keep it?" And I said, "Oh, yes. Oh, yes, keep
Yes,
it."
I don't know of any others except this one and that one now. This is some kind of a vaporizer. This is actually a sputum cup. This is a patient.
That's what it was. We knew we'd have to get the sputum before we finished here today.
People who, saved their sputum. Essentially, the idea was not to spit on the street. There was a $50 fine for spitting on the street in Saranac Lake. And so this was sort of an early version of Kleenex, I suppose. And all these things, and these are liners. So there were cardboard liners that were replaced every day, and the inside was taken out and burned. And so that was one of the sanitary precautions.
You know,
that they
you
took.
just said the magic word, and that is Kleenex. Because that's, of course, a brand name of paper tissues. And it's very possible that paper tissues were invented because of Saranac Lake. Did you know that?
I suspected that. Because
It's very possible because they didn't come around for a very, very long time. And I can't remember paper tissues from my childhood. So I'm not sure what year the paper tissues came along, probably long before that, and we were too poor to buy them, so everybody carried a handkerchief.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. But
Because they're ubiquitous now, of course, everywhere. You have a box of Kleenex, right?
Right. Well, you remember Lorison Brown and his rules for recovery from tuberculosis. Yes. Well, he was recommending the use of vacuum cleaners very early, too, because rather than sweeping and tossing up the dust, which would have bacteria in it, tubercle bacillus in it. So they were using all kinds of whatever was the latest way to keep things clean, to keep things sanitary, to keep other people from catching the disease. And in fact, Lorison Brown founded this magazine called the Journal of the Outdoor Life.
Of the Outdoor Life.
This was founded up at the Trudeau Sanatorium, and later picked up by the Lung Association and published there. But these are earlier copies. So Karen has collected.
And what you're seeing here is not a recreation, folks. This is it.
Yeah.
This is the way this room always was, with the electric light in the old.
Yeah, and the wood paneled. And, because and it's actually a treatment that's often used in Adirondack camps as well, because if you don't heat the room, and it were plastered, it would expand and contract and break up. But this kind of wood interior, when it's cold, it just absorbs the expansion and contraction.
This is just absolutely Huber the Tuber by Harry Wilmer, M.D. Isn't that great? Put out by the National Tuberculosis Association. Well, it's just absolutely wonderful to see one of the rooms and see one of the porches, and to imagine what it was like
to be sitting here for a day after day.
Yeah. And you said somebody actually occupied this until the 70s, you think?
Yeah. Not this room, the one in the back, but a room in this building. He was still sleeping out on his porch.
Look at these wonderful windows. When's the last time you saw this? Huh? With the heavy weights in the
green
inside?
Shade. Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
And actually, the bed in the bedroom is an iron bed of the type that was used all over town.
We're coming, Cal.
Very simple, because things were kept very simple so that they could be disinfected, actually. There was not a lot of elaborate materials.
There is, next to Calvin's left-hand side, is a potty chair. He may not have known that, but I have one identical to that. Absolutely identical to that.
Oh, and here's rules for recovery.
There it is.
Here's the book itself.
Which we've mentioned so many times. Isn't that the best? And there are photographs on the walls.
And she has, let's see what else is here. Here's some examples of, these are the Trotty-Beck messages that were published here. They're little booklets, inspirational booklets. And this was a business that was started by a patient, actually, two patients.
No kidding. They're almost like tracts, like the old religious tracts.
These were, Beanie Barnett founded these. He was known as Beanie here because he was from Boston. And he was sick in bed and needed a little way to occupy himself and make a little money. And so he and his roommate, I think Seymour Eaton, collected quotations, inspirational quotations on sort of a theme. Each one had a different title, and published them and then sold them inexpensively. And sometimes they were, after a while, they were sent to soldiers who were away in the war, and you know, it was something that they could carry easily and give them a little boost, hopefully sometimes. And so it was one of the many examples of the kinds of businesses that patients started. Sometimes they would do some kind of radio work, do some kind of deliveries, you know, just whatever, sell magazine subscriptions, whatever kinds of things they could do with their limited amount of energy. So maybe from bed, or maybe from, you know, being able to get up and work part-time. And there were many people who came here who were professional people in other capacities. Architects and bankers and many doctors had come as patients originally, and then sometimes changed their specialty and became TB specialists because they had had this experience, and they were, of course, really very sympathetic and very understanding. In fact, there was also a nursing school up at Trudeau Sanatorium. It was the Ogden Mills School of Nursing. That was established while Dr. Trudeau was still alive, before 1915, and I was reading in one of the annual reports of the sanatorium the other day, and it mentioned that all their nurses had had TB themselves. And so, yeah, and so they were learning ways that they could continue to make a living without overdoing it, you know, still in a moderate way.
It's a good point to mention that my wife's Aunt Peg, Marjorie Trudeau, worked in one of the cure houses, cottages here as a nurse, probably in the 20s and 30s. And Kate told me just before I left this morning that as a teenager in high school, at Petrova High School, she worked in one of the cottages. I said, "What did you do?" She said, "Oh, carried trays and helped out in whatever way I could."
Yeah, well, there were tray boys. I didn't know there were tray girls as well. But that was one of the things. They had a long lunch hour in the school so that kids could run home. These were particularly for the non-ambulatory, the bedridden patients, who would then go to the kitchen, get the trays, deliver them, wait for the patients to eat, bring the trays back, and then go back to school.
She worked mostly in the summertime, she said.
Yeah.
But perhaps in the winter too. So everything is connected.
It is. So these cottages were either nursing cottages for bedridden patients or for ambulatory patients such as this one, and these were called up cottages because patients were up.
Oh, isn't that great? Another use for the word up. I wrote a column about it a few weeks ago. How many different ways we use that word? Think about it.
That's funny.
Up cottages, that's a
new one.
Add to the list.
Add to your list.
So what would happen here? There would be a group of patients that would live right here? And
yes.
There'd be a staff that took care of them?
Yeah, often these cottages were owned by someone else and then rented by a nurse who ran them as a cottage, and would provide. If it was a nursing cottage, there would be nursing staff. If it were ambulatory cottage, it probably didn't necessarily have a staff. Sometimes they were in pairs, so there was a cottage for bedridden patients and a cottage for up patients that would be run together as one unit. And these were private commercial sanatoria. They were, so the patients paid the operator of the cottage, and the doctor would visit, or they would go to visit the doctor themselves if they were well enough, I suppose. And but they were sort of independent caring in a way. Sorry.
So were there dozens of these, hundreds of these?
Probably hundreds.
Probably hundreds. Yeah. Well, at least at different times. At any one time, there were lists of cottages in various kinds of publications, and
I saw lists of well over 100. I think the number 236 sticks in my mind. So when you said hundreds, there was a bingo in there. So there were lots.
There were lots.
On almost every street.
Well, many buildings in Saranac Lake have porches. Even commercial buildings downtown have porches upstairs. And all we know about those is really from ads in the newspapers, which are rather scarce for that period. But people would rent a room up above a bank or up above a grocery or whatever, and use the porches there and just do that as independent.
And there was a lot of
Curing.
industry connected with the cure cottages and the whole Trudeau scheme, to the point where many of the downtown stores, including Leonard's, I have a clock that came from there. That's why I mentioned it to Calvin. But Leonard's made a living during many years selling the cure chairs like we just saw out on the porch. And they imported them by the hundreds and sold them out of there to the cure
And they were
cottages.
made here as well. They were
Yeah.
Starks had a factory upstairs in their hardware store where they assembled them. There were livery stables, delivery services, lots of pharmacies, lots of dairies, lots of laundries, commercial laundries, because they had to disinfect all these sheets and towels for all these patients, So more than the average amount of laundry, I would think, because of people in bed.
It was a cohesive community
Yeah.
effort for
Yeah.
many
Yeah.
years. And almost every family was connected, hooked up with it, one way or the other.
Yeah.
The small children to the older adults many times.
And there were a lot of construction businesses here,
Yeah.
building cottages, modifying cottages as the styles changed or the technology changed. They added porches to many of these houses on this hill particularly are older and were built with only a veranda, not with the sleeping porches upstairs. And then those were added later on. So there was a continual modification going on.
You're ready for your college degree, and
So Trudeau and the other doctors would make house calls to these cottages?
Oh, they
or-
did, definitely. Yeah. Trudeau, I don't know how, after a while, he made calls up at the sanatorium. I don't know how much he did in the village after that, but the doctors definitely made house calls, sure. I mean, that was not unheard of in the middle of the 20th century to have doctors.
not at all.
Yeah. And even, I think I've heard that there are doctors here who have occasionally still make house calls, hasn't he?
That's great. Only in Saranac.
Only in Saranac Lake.
But not $2 a piece anymore. Not $2.
Well,
per house.
if you look at your bill from the from the insurance, they're not getting a whole lot more than that. It's not covering costs at this
It's
point.
incredible, isn't it? Huh?
Yeah, it really has to be
Great
goodness of
information. Have we seen just about everything in here now?
We have.
That's
Yeah.
wonderful, Mary. Thanks so much. We'll continue our tour.
All right.
Well, we've come across town, and we want to see Little Red. Where are we now, Mary?
We're at the Trudeau Institute on Lower Saranac Lake, and when they closed the sanatorium and the Saranac Laboratory, Frank Trudeau founded this institute for medical research here, and it's thriving. It's been here, I think, 45 years now. They're celebrating 125th anniversary of the institute, beginning Trudeau's institutions, beginning with the sanatorium this year.
And it's only right that Little Red should be here.
Absolutely. They brought Little Red as it was a small cottage, easy, movable. In fact, it moved several times when it was on the sanatorium
Yes, it did.
grounds. And they also brought the Trudeau statue, so we'll see that in a few moments. But this is the first of the patient cottages. It's for 2 patients. It's just one room inside, and we'll be able to go inside and have a look.
And this was built less than 10 years after Trudeau got here. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And you can't beat it. And thank goodness somebody donated some money to restore it a bit, huh?
It was restored a couple of years ago with some state grants. Yeah.
Isn't that
Yeah.
wonderful? And
Yeah.
we're going to take a walk
We'll have
inside.
a
All right,
look.
let's do it. We're on the inside, and the warmth of the sun has not penetrated these walls, Mary.
No, it hasn't. It's cold in here.
And in reading the notes to Calvin on the way up here, we mentioned the Hall sisters. Tell us about them.
Alice and Mary Hall, they were patients, the first patients here who occupied this building. They shared this cottage together, and both got better and went home. They were the first of the patients that paid for care at the sanatorium.
Isn't it wonderful that this building has been preserved and moved, as you said, several times, so it'll be here in perpetuity, we hope.
That's the plan, yes.
Isn't that great? Look at the old stove. And
So it's very simple. You can see how simple the interior is. And with the metal beds, they had a screen, probably went to the main building for washing and for their meals. But some of the patients who stayed here remembered hearing wolves howling when they were
Oh,
on
wow, we talked
visit.
about bears. I forgot about the wolves, of course.
Yeah, it was a...
The Adirondack region was famous for its wolves, and there's been efforts down through the years, more recently, to reinstate them in this pristine environment. But I don't.
Out-of-towners want to do it.
Out of town, it ain't gonna happen.
Well,
That's
it might happen the way the moose happened, come back on their own.
isn't that interesting all by itself?
But it seems like a reasonable way to do it.
Yeah.
If the environment supports them,
Well,
they'll come back.
you know, Calvin and I were saying when you went to get that beautiful skeleton key to open the door, what a charming person you are, and how refreshing it is to find somebody who really cares about history and who can recount it so eloquently.
Well, thank you very much.
You've made it your life's work and your passion. Did you go to college to study history, or?
Well, after I had already worked here for 6 years, I think, I went back to the University of Vermont and got a
Did you?
master's degree in historic preservation over there.
Oh, isn't that wonderful? We want to mention before I forget it, because I tend to do that you do tours.
We do tours in the summertime, beginning probably around 4th of July, the week after 4th of July. Wednesdays at 11 o'clock at the town hall in the middle of downtown Saranac Lake. We meet at the Chamber of Commerce office and do a walking tour. It's about an hour, hour and a half, and go walk around downtown, talk about this history, and go into the laboratory as well.
You know, I mentioned the word perpetuating the love for this history. And we did a recent interview with Ann Smallman in Malone. She talked about the little Girl Scouts coming and doing tours, and about teaching local history in the 4th grade level in the schools. All these things are absolutely vital, aren't they?
Oh, I think so.
Inspire the
What do they
kids and
say?
the parents
Yeah.
and the grandparents.
But yeah, what do they say? That those who don't remember
yes,
history
are
are
doomed to repeat
doomed
it.
to repeat it. Yes, I think we can see some of that in our government recently.
It's
Yeah.
absolutely true, but so
paying
many
attention.
people's lives are so fractionalized that they don't pay attention to where they've been. They're so interested in doing whatever they're doing right now.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know.
we're getting more people who are doing genealogical research, for instance.
Isn't it great to see that upsurge?
And that's sort of how that manifests itself in people today, I think,
Yeah.
is interested in their family history.
Well, we mentioned...
As you both have mentioned,
we've
have
mentioned-
family here.
Yeah, we mentioned the word connections several times, and I'm sure lots of people watching this program are saying, "Hey, Harry, get in here. Wasn't your grandmother up there," or whatever.
Well,
you
it's
know?
amazing. When I give tours, it's so very often someone from the group says, "Oh, yes, my aunt, my mother, my family members were here." And that they come because they have a special interest. It's not just sort of a general interest in history, but a special interest in this history.
How can people hook up to you have a website.
We have a website, historicsaranaclake.org.
Easy.
And easy
to remember.
Yeah,
Easy to navigate, too.
and we have a wiki as well,
It's wonderful. I'm
to
very
which
proud of you for that this morning when I
Thank you.
discovered that.
Well, yeah, that's new, and thanks to a very avid volunteer who set it up for us and who is constantly working on it. It's over 1,000 pages now.
Oh, it's terrific.
But it's searchable,
I
which is
almost missed breakfast because of that this morning.
the great thing about it is it's searchable.
Oh,
So you
sure.
can go in and you can type in a little box in the upper right-hand corner there. You can type in whatever is of interest to you and see what we've got that relates to that. And we're because it's a wiki, you're welcome to add your own information as well. So you could put up some people have put up, for instance, family albums, pictures. We're covering, the territory we're covering is that of the Saranac Lake Central School District. So it's more than just the village, it's out in the area around, which is it's the largest school district in New York State.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Never would have guessed that,
Yeah.
considering the size of the community.
But it was centralized for many little rural schools around. So it goes out to Paul Smith's, and it goes even as far as Black Brook toward you all, but just a little sliver of Black Brook.
That's the history of our nation, isn't it? The little tiny schoolhouses.
Yeah, and Ray Brook in Essex County, and also St. Armand, all those.
Oh, yes.
And so they're, and also in terms of time, 1980 or so back. We're not trying to be
Okay.
timely so much as collect history. But if you wanted to get on there and have a page for, your wife's mother and her experiences being a tray girl, that would be great. You can just write it in.
Isn't that great?
It's easy to use.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much. Now, are we going back home?
Well, we're going to go around and see the statue, the Guts and Borglum statue of E.L. Trudeau.
I think we will.
Let's go.
Okay. You wonder why people have been attracted to this Adirondack region, Saranac Lake, since, I'm sure with Native Americans before recorded history, but then in the early 1800s and onward, and why this has been such a magnet for tourism. All you have to do is look off this bluff. Huh?
Isn't that a beautiful view?
Oh, Mary.
Lower Saranac Lake.
Just breathtaking. In this season, and just about any other, when it's snow-covered, it's nice. You need a heavier coat than we have on this day in April when it's beautiful. But in the fall of the year, my, spectacular.
Well, last fall we had a history day on Lower Saranac Lake at
Did
the
you?
Guggenheim camp, and specifically about the history of the lake, because we felt we'd sort of neglected it in a way. We concentrated so much on the TB history of the community, and it's really a history that's been a recreational history right along.
Yeah.
And the TB was in a way part of that, but then it was it came and it went again, and the recreation history continues.
This statue, isn't it? There's a picture worth 1,000 words, isn't it?
It is. It's Guts and Borglum, the sculptor of Mount Rushmore,
Oh, yes.
made this statue. He had seen Dr. Trudeau in life. He'd come to do a plaque for the Stevenson cottage of Stevenson, which is on the porch there. And at the time, this was in 1915, shortly before Trudeau died, he met Trudeau, who was not well enough to come out and meet him, but he went to his house and saw him. And so this is said to be a very good likeness of the man.
It
Very
certainly is.
accurate.
Look at the character in the face itself. Isn't
Yeah.
it truly amazing?
And he's in the same position of a curing patient that we saw in the portrait of John Black, actually.
Of course we did.
Yeah,
With the blanket, and
yeah.
that's great. And what a peaceful spot this is, just around to the back of the Trudeau Institute. A nice place to just come and reflect,
Yeah.
isn't it?
I love to bring people here to show them this. It's like an introduction to the man who really caused the development of this community.
Well, you have given us so many insights today. As I said before, most of us who've lived around here for a while have little smatterings of it. Know a paragraph here or there, remember a name or a date. But to tell the story as you have so darn eloquently today is just incredible for us and for our viewers for a long time to come. And I would urge our viewers, if they're watching this on their cable system, to tell their friends in far-flung places like Oshkosh and Seattle that we're also on Plattsburgh.com, where a full listing of literally hundreds of our programs are available for people to watch at their leisure. And isn't it nice when you can spread the word?
Oh, definitely. And you're telling me also that this we'll be able to link this on our website.
Sure.
So
Absolutely,
yeah.
everybody can.
Yeah.
And that makes it even more valuable because
Oh, yeah.
the world is just in our lifetimes, and I'm at least twice as old as you are, where the world has become so much smaller. It does every day.
It's the connections,
Yeah.
the ease of the connections that makes so much difference.
That's great. And it behooves people who come, they might drive up to this area to see John Brown's grave, for example, or to see some of the historic sites. When you have a whole community that is historic, spend some time in Saranac Lake. Come on down and
Ride the train.
ride the scenic Adirondack Railroad. With Calvin was on the front of that during the whole trip, trying to hold on. But boy, the pictures were beautiful. I was inside in great comfort.
Well, that usually starts up around Memorial Day and runs till Columbus Day in the fall. So the season is soon to be upon us.
Yeah, and
Come and have a ride.
We hope maybe that some of that stimulus money can be used to open up another leg of that railroad all the way down through the mountains.
Oh, that would
Wouldn't
be great. We hope for at least Tupper Lake and hopefully even farther.
Oh
Yeah.
That's great. Those historic heritage railroad spurs are so great, aren't
Yeah.
they?
There's a historic exhibit in the depot here that we created. I don't know if you saw that.
Oh, yes, we
yeah,
did. We spent,
yeah.
oh, I have a lot of still pictures of that. There's
Yeah.
great stuff down
Yeah.
there. I'm always lingering. Calvin says, we gotta go. Like my kids used to be when, come on, Dad, we gotta go.
The train was leaving.
Yeah, oh, the train was leaving. That's a good reason,
That's a
right?
good reason,
Don't
yeah.
miss the train.
Yeah.
All right, now where? Back home?
Back to the Adirondack room of the Saranac Lake Free Library to see those scrapbooks about Ray Brook.
Oh, that's wonderful. Let's do it.
Okay, let's go.
Mary, that's a familiar building.
Well, it should be. It's photographed many, many times, and it's in many postcards. It's the main building at the what was the Adirondack Cottage Sanitorium, and then when Dr. Trudeau died in 1915, the name was changed to Trudeau Sanatorium, and so that's it's still standing.
It's still standing,
yeah.
but not readily accessible to the public anymore.
Not anymore. No, and the property is all owned by American Management Association. They do their business up there on that campus, and so they have since 1957. They're an important Adirondack employer, a private employer. Nearly 200 people, I think, are employed there. So that's of great importance to us here, too.
It's a great building, isn't
It is a great building, yeah. It was designed by Lawrence Aspinwall, again, Dr. Trudeau's cousin.
Oh, yes.
And this was built in actually summer of 1896. There had been another main building on the same site, and it was torn down and replaced with this building because they needed a bigger and better main building. And so they had to get it all done in one summer, and that was the place where they had the dining room for all the ambulatory patients, who were mostly all the patients there at the time. And so you see in the background there's a recreation pavilion there over to the left, and they used that for the dining room for the whole summer.
No
An
kidding.
open air dining room, yeah.
It's nice up there. It's too bad people can't drive through there anymore. I've driven past there many times, and I just love
Yeah.
that's a nice spot way up there, isn't it?
Oh, it's beautiful, and that actually the location was part of the cure in a way. It was the wonderful surroundings. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think especially when patients are in bed for a long time, if there's something interesting going on outside the window, it's you feel as if there's a part of life you're still part of. There was a patient named Isabel Smith who was in bed. She was up at the sanatorium for over 20 years, and at one point she was in Ludington Infirmary, which is up on the top of the hill above this, and there was a meteor shower, and she wrote about this in a book that she wrote
No
called
kidding.
Wish I Might.
haven't seen that.
Yeah, it's called Wish I Might. It's a pretty rare book, I think, but they have a copy here. And she had the feeling that she was actually experiencing life for a change at the same time everybody else was, and as close as everybody else was, because
that neat?
she snuck and stayed up late and to watch it from her window where she had a really front row view up high on a mountain and looking out over the valley.
I love it. Where are we now, Mary?
Where we are
Right
now, we're in the Adirondack room of the Saranac Lake Free Library. This is a research room. It's like a rare book room where you can't take these books out, but you're welcome to come and use them. And it's very well organized and well taken care of. And
For a small town library, it's got some really neat stuff.
oh,
down
it does. It really has a premier collection of Adirondack materials,
Yeah.
of all kinds.
So interesting people come in and out of here just to take a look at things.
Oh,
every now and
absolutely.
again.
Yeah, there's a book. You can look at some of the names of people who are here and how often people are here. It's very frequent.
And we're going to take a look at some really great scrapbooks.
These are albums of photographs of the Ray Brook Sanatorium, which was the second state sanatorium in the country. It was built in 1904. Massachusetts was first. New York State had a long, protracted, I guess that's pretty common with New York State government, a very long process of trying to figure out where to put a sanatorium, and it ended up right here where they might have done it instinctively right at the beginning. But there was a critical mass, of doctors and information here about TB, and it seemed crazy to do it anywhere else. So Ray Brook was often the last stop for patients because it was free to New York State residents, and so if they were at Trudeau and ran out of money, they would often move to Ray Brook, or at other cure cottages as well.
That's wonderful. Well, let's
So
have a look at
let's-
these books,
all right.
okay?
These- oh, right.
All right, we're into the scrapbooks from 1950, Mary. Just go right ahead and tell us what we're looking at as we go.
Well, these were all from the Brook State Sanatorium, these two scrapbooks, and we'll just go quickly through some
Sure.
interior shots. This is Dr. Harry Bray. The key says it's with a young patient. I think there were more young, very young patients at Brook than probably most any place else.
Oh,
They mostly didn't have children here. They were older, maybe late teenagers. And Dr. Bray has this golf club with him, which I think he used as a walking stick. He had a small golf course on the grounds that for the patient's use as well. So here's an aerial shot. This sanatorium is now a state prison, and so it's surrounded by razor wire, and it's a little scary compared to this. But this is a nice aerial shot of the big buildings. And here's, you get closer up, see some people in the yard and all the porches. Now these porches have been enclosed now, but here you can see how open they were. And there are also these curved roofs, and there are pictures of people in other places curing on those roofs.
oh, right on the roof.
Yeah,
Oh.
out in the weather. That's this. So that's a sort of a head-on shot of one of the buildings. What does this say? This is the infirmary, the surgical building. It says it was completed in 1939.
Okay.
Sanatorium building under construction, 1904. Includes administration, east and west wings. Pryor and McDonald wings were constructed at a later date. I love construction photos. So this is the duck pond. There was a pond up at the Trudeau Sanatorium as well, where patients used to like to walk. This is the circle in front of the administration building, obviously at Christmas, all lit up. Of course, because the patients were,
Leave it flat.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. This is the lobby of the administration building. It says the fountain is in the background out there.
Yeah, quite nice.
Yeah, well, they're said to be beautiful buildings, beautifully furnished. Here's the main dining room. And more shots of the dining room. Look at this with that. It's like going to, it's like
Isn't it?
fine dining
Like
with
a
white
posh
table,
hotel, huh?
white tablecloths.
Sure.
This is the main dining room. It says before renovation. So this is an earlier, simpler time when it looked more like an old hotel, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah. This is a solarium in the women's wing. A room. Mostly they didn't prescribe sitting in the sun for TB patients because it would raise your temperature, But depending on if for at least pulmonary TB, but for certain skin conditions and things, it was recommended. This is a men's solarium before renovation, and then there's the following one will be after renovation. There it is, looking more modern. Oh, and with pool tables.
Old table, sure.
So solarium before renovation. So you can see that it was a Victorian sort of an institution.
Yeah.
And then it was modernized. The lobby in the infirmary building, beautiful paneling. Oops. This is an alcove on the patient's floor in the infirmary building. So there were changes of scenery within the sanatorium, so
Sure.
the patients could
Beautiful.
not feel. One of the big points was because they were here, patients were here for a long time, months and months, since they wanted them to feel comfortable and as if they were at home, not that it was a temporary situation or that it was a hospital. That was an
Yeah.
effort. It also at Will Rogers. The point was to make it home-like. This is the laboratory, Edworm Laboratory. Now, this is interesting. This is the early 1900s, a summer tent colony at Brook. They had so much demand for patients, rooms for patients, that they set up tents and patients cured outdoors. And of course, that's what Dr. Trudeau did at camp anyway, and a lot of patients did that in the earliest days. They came only for the summertime and cured in tents, and as if they were, on a camping trip, and then went home in the wintertime. But Trudeau changed all that by staying the winter. This is the main dining room on the east side. The duck pond again.
Oh, look at that. Isn't that
Yeah.
pretty?
Little waterfall and some bridges. More ducks.
Them are ducks.
Says ditto.
They're beautiful.
A pond on the Ray Brook Golf Course.
Oh, my.
Now, there is a Ray Brook, there's a golf course there now on what was the Meadowbrook Dairy. And before that, it was a historic farm, settlement period farm, Daniel Ames Farm. And then it became the Meadowbrook Dairy, and I think that may be where this is. But it's still an active golf course, the Saranac Lake Golf Course. This is a view from the infirmary building. Look at that. Terrific contrast.
Look at that. Isn't
Look
it
at the
beautiful?
clouds. Yeah. Well, the mountain views were I think, a great advantage for people to.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. And here's a row of exercising patients. There's 6 girls in a row there. Out for a walk, I think. Women's wing, east or McDonald, of the sanatorium building, viewed from the duck pond, and look at all those porches. And this is again the women's wing, viewed from the infirmary building, looking out the window. I think people were watching one another from a distance. This is a golf course, viewed from the infirmary, framed by the window. And this is the dam at Ray Brook. This was a very settlement period dam, Ames Mill here. And that's still there, and what's in the background is the railroad station, which was very important for patients coming and getting there. So many of the sands, not Trudeau, but the others, Stonywald and Ray Brook and Gabriel's all had railroad stations associated with them, where very near the sanatorium, where patients could come
Makes
and go,
sense.
and visitors as well,
Sure.
because of course these people weren't here necessarily in isolation. There were lots and lots of visitors, and that is part of the economic impact of having all these patients in town. Scarface Mountain, a familiar view from the hospital grounds, and also
yes.
beautiful birches.
My, my, my.
Playing field on the hospital grounds beyond the powerhouse, and some game going on. There must be baseball. It's arranged around. A picnic area with a gazebo. Golf course. Look at that. Now, I don't know if this is their golf course, or if I presume it is. The small one, I think it was something like 6 holes. Missed a picture here. Winter scene. This is, again, the sanatorium building. And of course, people were out exercising in all weather. This is the brook, the path to the picnic area, winter scene. Steps to physicians' cottages on the hill in the winter. Bridge on the road to the physicians' cottages. Another winter scene. And that's all the pictures in this album, and we'll go to the one that has the people in it.
All right, we'll do that. Well, we've gone through the second scrapbook, and we've earmarked, there's a word for the new century, earmarked a few pages. And where are we starting?
Oh, well, this is an entry to the building, administration building, just as a little introduction. And then we're going to have a look at Mac McConkey, who was MD, who was the assistant medical director. And
Oh, yes.
Dr. McConkey had developed, I think, what was called the Ray Brook cocktail, which, as I understand it, was cod liver oil
Oh, my.
floating on orange juice. I
Oh,
think.
my, my, my. That would do it.
That would do it, yeah. So a lot of patients would remember McConkey.
Yeah.
And then we're going to skip here to page 8, which is a picture of the staff, groups of the staff, and then what's going on down here? They're flying model airplanes.
Model airplanes. Isn't
And-
that amazing?
And a lot of patients sitting out watching what was going on. So There was a lot of sociability and a lot of entertainment going on at these places too, even in the state sanatorium.
Sure.
And here is a group of, but this fellow, this is Norman Bethune. He's one of the famous people that visited Saranac Lake, and he had been a patient at Trudeau Sanatorium. He taught at the nursing school there. He worked out at Brook as well. He had been a patient himself, and he was from Canada. And while he was here, he painted on the walls of his room. He was staying in Lee Cottage up at Trudeau Sanatorium, and had brown paper, like wrapping paper from the laundry, I think, around the walls of this cottage, and he painted what he called the TB's progress, which was a whole history of what he thought his life was going to have, how it began and how he thought he saw it ending. But he was quite an iconoclastic character, and he left after a while, and later on went to, I think he was involved in the Spanish Civil War, but he also went to China, and he developed a sort of a MASH unit for Chairman Mao when he was on the Long March, and he ran these field hospitals and actually didn't have any support from home and didn't get the supplies he needed and died from an infection from operating. And he's famous in China. He's very well known in China, and his Mao wrote about him, and there's it's quoted in the Little Red Book, and there are statues to him in China. So visiting Chinese are very interested in seeing this picture of, or knowing that Norman Bethune was in Saranac Lake. So we'll move on to, this is Anne Sanlow, Chief X-ray Technician and Staff Photographer. Well, this whole book shows a lot of the staff. They're portraits of a lot of people, and this one I thought was interesting. It's 3 of the nurses, and I remember Madeline Nemeth, the lady on the left, who lived across the street from me up on Park Avenue for many years. Yeah. And the woman in the middle is Essie Harder, Assistant Director of Nursing, and Margaret Sweeney on the right, the Director of Nursing.
That's interesting. The cottage that my wife worked at as a teenager was on Park Avenue.
Well, there were many cottages up there, so there was quite a choice. Now, and just as a sample of some of the staff that they took pictures of, this is George Riebel, who was the chef. I think his family still lives in Brook, or some members of them. And this page is Charlotte Gefkin, doing occupational therapist. She was also an artist, and there are examples of her work here in this room. She sculpted and
Terrific.
yeah, she did beautiful work. And the other lady on the same page is Ruth Goodwin, who's the secretary. Oh, this, you had to see this. These are Dr. Bray's beagles, being apparently cared for by a couple of members of the staff. He must have been a hunter, huh?
What a wonderful tour. Better than the Cook's tour. Mary Hoteling, thank you so much
Oh, you're so welcome.
for inviting us up here today. We now are qualified for our master's degrees in Saranac Lake history. But you know what? I hope we can come back sometime.
Well, please do. Please do. There are always new opportunities to see interesting things here.
Thank you so much for having us here. We've loved every minute of it, and who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.